Ashwin, welcome.
Hi, Sivantika. Hi.
Welcome to the Right Circle event. Right Circle is an initiative of Prabha Khaitan Foundation in association with Ehsas Women of Jodhpur. Our hospitality partners are Taj Hari Mahal, and we are presented by Sri Cements Limited.
Great to be with all of you, and thank you for hosting this session, Sivantika, and thank you, Apra, for being the great mover behind the scenes always. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Ashwin. I'm sure all our participants are completely aware of who Ashwin Sanghi is, but I think what describes him best, and which is on your website, Ashwin, so this is from there really, I'm not the author. He's a thinker, speaker, writer, and storyteller, and we all love the storyteller in you. He ranks amongst India's highest selling fiction authors and has several bestsellers to his credit: The Rosabelle Line, The Krishna Key, Chanakya's Chant, and also two New York Times best-selling. He's part of Forbes India in their Celebrity 100 and has many awards to his credit. His is a journey from an avid reader to a New York Times best-selling author. So welcome, Ashwin. If you were here in person, we would have given you a standing ovation. So this is us giving you a standing ovation.
You're so sweet, Sivantika. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, Ashwin, when I was reading about you a little bit before when I was asked to come for this session, a very interesting thing popped up, and I will start at the very beginning, your first Rosabelle Line. It was written under a nom de plume, as they say.
Yes.
And it's written under a very interesting name, Sean Higgins, which is a perfect anagram for your name. I'm quite curious why, and how come you dropped it? It's a lovely nom de plume, by the way.
Well, I think probably we need to start not at the beginning, but a little before the beginning. Maybe to a certain extent, before I even decided to self-publish, that particular name had already been used by me. In my avatar prior to that of a writer, I grew up as a businessman. In fact, I'm delighted to be here in this particular Right Circle because my father hails from Jodhpur. So in that sense, this is almost in some ways a homecoming to be sitting and chatting with all of you, in this wonderful city that I have beautiful memories of. But having said that, the business part of my life, I wanted to keep it very distinct and separate from my writing life. And so there were many articles that I wrote for newspapers and magazines before I became a published writer. And some of them were rather tongue-in-cheek articles. Some were a little irreverent. Some of them covered topics that I didn't know necessarily whether I wanted to be associated with. There was an article that I wrote maybe a couple of years before writing the Rosabelle Line, and that was an article which was written for Cosmopolitan magazine, which was about the relationship between men and women. And I wondered to myself, I said, in case someone who knows me in my business avatar comes across this article and reads it and will wonder that, what sort of person is Ashwin Sanghi? And so I said, hey, listen, I need to be free to write the way I want. And that's the time. In those days, of course, I was very fond of playing Scrabble. My wife and I both are avid Scrabble fans. And so I was just sitting with the Scrabble board in front of me, and I just put all the letters of Ashwin Sanghi on that Scrabble board, ASHWIN, SANGHI. And I started jumbling them around, trying to see how many reasonable names could I come up with. And the first one that came up was Sean Higgins. And so those articles were written under the pseudonym Sean Higgins. And of course, after that, when I sat down to write the Rosabelle Line, there were multiple rejections from publishers and literary agents And sometimes you begin to get fed up and you begin to think कि यार मेरे नाम में ही कुछ खोट होगा, कि वो नाम की वजह से ही शायद वो रिजेक्ट होता रहता है. And that is what actually ended up happening. I thought that there was something intrinsically unlucky about my name. So when I had to initially self-publish the Rosabal line, because by then virtually every publisher and literary agent had said no to the manuscript, that's the time when I said, okay, if I'm going to self-publish this, let me use the same pseudonym that I used for previous articles, that is Sean Higgins.
And you dropped it later.
What happened was that the book got self-published in 2007, sometime towards the end of 2007. And it was towards the end of 2008, almost a year later, that it got picked up for publishing by Westland. And the publisher, Gautam Padmanabhan, said, Ashwin, I will publish this book provided that you will drop the pseudonym. I said, why, Gautam? I'm very happy to be under this sort of cloud, and it's all very mysterious, and it's almost a little bit thrillerish. So leave it the way it is. And he said, no, we'll have a problem marketing the book, because imagine that we hold a press conference where we call the media and we say that you're going to be meeting with Mr. Sean Higgins, and then this Marwadi / Banya pot-bellied author comes up on stage and says, hi guys, I'm Sean Higgins. They said they'll die of culture shock. So there is a problem out there. You need to drop this. So the very first murder in any of the Ashwin Sanghi books is actually the murder of Sean Higgins.
Yes. That's another story, I guess.
That's another story.
It happened. So, I'm jumping straight into the Bible now, to the Gospel of John, and I think you know what's coming. 1838, chapter 18, verse 38. What is truth? And, very interestingly, you write about mythology, history, and then you tell a story about it. So what is your truth? What is Ashwin Sanghi's truth? And as a fiction writer, I've grown up to believe that Krishna is a god, and I believe in Mahabharata, and I believe in Ramayana. And here you have the Krishna key where, Krishna is not in the same narrative as I have grown up to believe. So when you were doing the fiction writing from supposed truths that India has grown up to believe, what is truth? And you can't walk away like Pontius Pilate did for Jesus,
Yes, but I frankly, that's an answer which I think is going to remain unanswered, not just in our generation. It's going to remain unanswered in several generations, as it has for all the generations that came before us, because everyone's definition of the truth is going to be different. And as the old proverb goes, there's your truth, there's my truth, and then there's the actual truth. But I don't think anyone can answer what that actual truth is. I think we have grown up in an environment where we were told that, hey, listen, what is within the world of history is truth, and what is within the world of myth is probably fantasy. But I don't see that also. I don't see history as the truth, because I believe it's just a version of events. I mean, if you take a book of mine like Chanakya's Chant, in Chanakya's Chant, I have one half of the book deals with the life story of Kautilya. Now, our history textbooks talk about Chanakya, and we grow up reading that history, and we think that that is a factual narrative of events. But the great Chanakya or the great Kautilya wrote a lot of material, for example, the Arthashastra and the Niti Shastra, but very little was written about his own life story. In fact, the story of Kautilya comes to us from a Sanskrit play known as the Mudra Rakshas. And the Mudra Rakshas was written by someone called Vishaka Datta, and that was written almost a good 700 years after the passing of Chanakya. More importantly, the Mudra Rakshas was written as a play to be performed on stage. Now, I wonder to myself, someone Sevantika writing about you 7 centuries from now, how much of it will you consider as fact? And what in case Vishaka Datta was an ancient day Ashwin Sanghi who was liberally mixing fact and fiction to bring you an interesting story? But today, the Mudra Rakshas is the basis for our historical narrative on Chanakya. So, in other words, it's very possible that many fictional elements have now become factual in that sense. On the other hand, of course, when you look at, and that's why I sometimes resonate with what George Santayana said about history. He said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, written by people who were never there.
Yes.
So we can't treat history as the so-called quote unquote gospel truth. Now, what about mythology? It was C.S. Lewis, who said that a myth is a lie that reveals a truth. So in that sense, you know that at face value, a myth may not be the truth, but you're expected to be digging for a deeper truth within the myth. And if you really think about it, in India, we had 2 bodies of literature. We had Itihas and we had Puran. Itihas, basically what is as it happened, the literal translation of Itihas, as it happened, or as it were told, or as it will happen. All of that, the past, future, the present, is all covered in Itihas. And the 2 works within Itihas, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. But then within the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, you have fantastical elements, which you know are probably not historical. And then on the other hand, with the Quran, which is considered to be fantastical, you also have historical lineages of kings. So in that sense, there was always an overlap between Itihas and Puran. And that is the space that excites me and interests me. So to my mind, the best way of really looking at or digging for the truth, you're not going to get there, but you can dig for it, is probably to find those zones of overlap. And that's pretty much what I do through my books. That where is the overlap between history and myth? Where is the overlap between myth and philosophy? Where is the overlap between science and philosophy? Those overlap zones are probably the best indicators of where you should be digging.
So you referred to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And these days, we grew up with the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And these days, it's back on Doordarshan for all of us to see. Here's my next question for you.
Sure.
And this is completely your perspective. Between Ram and Krishna, who do you think is the modern day God? You've described Krishna as the perfectly great character. You sort of hinted on his life in Krishna Ki. And I would think...
let me give you a very short answer to this. The short answer is that Krishna is exciting, Ram is boring. I mean, one of the unidimensional, all about goody-goody. I mean, it's the good student in class who was utterly boring. You actually wanted to tell the stories of the backbenchers because they had such exciting lives. In that sense, these 2 characters, I'm not attempting to downgrade Ram in any way, but the truth of the matter is that, that entire aura of the Maryada Purushottam, and on the other hand, I think when it comes down to the Krishna story, there is nothing that you can say which fits a particular narrative, or it's not unidimensional. There is that lovable cowherd who is stealing butter, and then suddenly the next moment he is also, assumed the Vishwaroop, and then there is another moment where he is got all the strategies, the battle strategies for Arjun to be able to win. And many of those battle strategies, even today, you wonder that, was this really fair, and was this really right, and was this really just? So in that sense, I think the reason why I like that particular character is because it doesn't fall into a compartment of black and white. There are just shades of gray, and that's what I love about Krishna.
So you're saying we should aspire to be Ram, but we'd rather be Krishna.
It's more exciting to be Krishna.
So I have a question for you, and here I want you to weave a short little story for us. If Krishna's life was to be written as a story by either Duryodhan or Shakuni, what would the story sound like? You know, if Ashwin Sanghi were to write it wearing Duryodhan's crown or Shakuni's body, how do you describe that character? And you hinted on this.
I think if I recall correctly, to some extent, of course, these characters, you know, I have always believed that a character is only in terms of a description of a character depends upon the perspective. So in that sense, it depends which angle you're coming from. I think there are different writers within the contemporary set of writers who have attempted it from multiple perspectives. Like, for example, today, someone like a Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni has looked at the female perspective for many of these characters. Someone like an Anand Neelkantan has looked at these characters, but from the perspective of the vanquished. So probably the angle of a Duryodhan. I would imagine that what makes Krishna very exciting is that even when it comes down to the vanquishing of his enemies, I would still imagine that the enemies would also not have a unidimensional perspective on Krishna. So you know, it's one of those sort of holograms where when you sort of change the angle at which you're viewing it, one of those little 3D images which kids play with, and when you change the angle from which you are viewing it, you are able to see some parts of it and are not able to see some parts of it. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Extremely multidimensional, so that the idea being that even if a Duryodhan or a Shakuni were to be talking about him, they would not be talking about him simply as being, you would expect that they have a higher degree of negativity about that character. That's fine, but there would still be good stuff.
So you think he'll be as godly as we would like him to be, or as we would believe him to be?
But the problem is that I don't know really what is your definition of God. My view on all of these characters like Krishna or Ram is that they were great men. And because of their great deeds, they came to be worshipped. I mean, I had just written the Rosabal line in 2005, and it had got published in 2007. Westland had finally brought out the Indian edition in 2008, and I still remember I was on the college circuit, and one of the cities that I had visited was Kolkata, and I was giving a lecture at one of the universities, and the afternoon, before I was taking the flight the next day, the afternoon was free. I told my driver on my duty, I said, just take me to some interesting place. I don't want to sit in the hotel. At that point of time, Sevantika, I had not even decided that I was going to be writing a second book. I was just sort of in that space where, I published one book. So the driver said, would you like to go to a mandir? I said, sure, take me. And he ended up taking me to a very simple sort of mandir on a street which is known as Sridhar Roy Road. And from outside, you can't even make out that it's a mandir. When you go inside, it's very, very simple because it has white walls, probably not more than maybe around 15 feet by 15 feet square. In the center of the room is a green colored throne. And there were a few people there who were praying, including a pujari who was reciting verses. And when I looked closely, I realized that actually the green colored throne, there was a portrait on it, which was a portrait of Amitabh Bachchan. So without realizing it, I had landed up at the Amitabh temple. And there was a pair of shoes on the throne. those shoes were shoes that had been used by Amitabh during the shooting of Coolie. I pinched myself, both literally, figuratively, that, have I entered into some parallel universe? Is this some other dimension? What is going on? And I came outside the temple. I was waiting for my car to come. And this little boy came up to me. He was holding a little basket in his hands. And, all the samagri that you would otherwise need in order to go into the mandir, prasad and flowers and incense. And, what I picked up from him, what I bought from him was a single little book. And it fascinated me because it was called the Amitabh Chalisa. I have that book in my study, and it was fascinating that was the extent to which a person, by simply his stardom, fame, deeds, what have you, begins to be worshipped. Now, at that moment of time, I had a thought, and that thought was that, okay, Ashwin, what if you are waiting here for your car, and your car comes along, the driver is a little careless, and he comes at a very high speed, is unable to control the car, and he knocks you down. And what if you die at this moment and you take birth 1,000 years from now? Your next birth is 1,000 years from now. And 1,000 years from now, the cult of Amitabh worship has really caught on. And now there isn't one temple dedicated to Amitabh, but there are 100,000 temples dedicated to Amitabh. And you are at another college, at another university, giving another lecture for some other reason. And one of the participants asks you that, do you think Amitabh could have been a real man? Do you think he could have been a historical character? But that's precisely the question that we are asking today about Rama and Krishna. So the way I see it is that these were, at some point of time, you could not have had a Rishi Vyas sitting down to pen 100,000 verses of the Mahabharata. You would not have had 300 versions of the Ramayana if there wasn't some kernel of truth in those stories. So they started out as historical narratives. And eventually, as generations went by, everyone added on their own layer onto that story, as a result of which the historical narrative has got lost in the layer of myth.
So here, someone from the audience is wanting to ask you something which is related to our discussion.
Sure.
What are the two characteristics of Krishna that resonate in today's scenario?
Well, I think probably the one thing that comes across is that to a very great extent, when people start compartmentalizing in terms of good and bad, the good and bad depends on that particular situation. So, it's like what we find ourselves today in a lockdown. I'm sure you'll find people on both sides of the fence in terms of the politics of the situation. That there will be some people who say that, hey, listen, the Modi government has done the perfect thing by having done the lockdown. And then there will be others who will say that this is entirely inhuman because there are so many people who are daily wage earners who are completely caught at the wrong end of this particular narrative. But the point is that there isn't going to be a clear-cut classification of good and bad. Good and bad will depend upon your perspective. A slap delivered to a stranger on the road is a bad act, but a slap delivered by a mother to a child who is about to set himself on fire is probably a good act. So the action is the same. I think that nuance is what Krishna helps us understand. And I think increasingly in our world, we are not going to have unidimensional narratives. We are going to have to be able to evolve with the situation. And that is the one characteristic that comes across with Krishna all the time, that he evolves and that he understands that ultimately it is not the action, but the intention behind the action, which actually has a greater importance of some sort.
So you hinted on the current times and how, it's going to be more shades of gray is what I got from your discussion here. I wanted to ask you, and many people have been talking about it, what is your view as to how life, in particular, how our perception of God and our country and the idea of India will change post this crisis, whenever we emerge from this crisis? How does life and our idea of religion and country change?
Well, I think, it was my book, The Krishna Key, in which I can't remember which page it was, but there was a conversation that happens and someone asks, what is God? And I had in that narrative said that, God is basically what is left from infinity after you have subtracted human knowledge. So in that sense, it goes back to a conversation that I had with Dan Brown when he was in India, and we ended up having a rather extended dinner of 3-4 hours, and where he asked me the question, okay, what is your definition of God? And on a little paper napkin, I wrote G is equal to infinity minus K and handed it over to him. And then, of course, he wanted to know more, that what is this? So I said, well, let's say G is what we consider to be God. Infinity is the whole wide universe. It's what we consider to be Brahman. Goes way beyond the cosmic egg, because the Brahman is created and destroyed several times. The Big Bang and the Big Crunch keeps happening. But let us say that anything and everything that exists in the universe is infinity. And then, of course, K is the extent of human knowledge. What do we know? So, for example, the ancient Egyptians, they saw the sun rise in the east and they saw it set in the west, but they didn't know what it was. So they said, well, the sun is let's call him Ra. He's the sun god. And, he gets up in the morning and he travels across the skies in his chariot. And, when he's traveling across the skies, we see him, and that's the day. And then, of course, at night, he gets tired and wants to go to sleep. And so when he goes to sleep, that's the nighttime, that when we have darkness. And of course, later on, we had people like Galileo and Copernicus and, others who came along and said, no, the sun is a giant ball of fire and it's a ball of energy. And we revolve around the sun. And it's the gravitational pull of the sun that keeps us in place. And suddenly, poor sun, poor Surya, poor Ra had lost his divine status in some ways, because now we could understand it. Now we could explain it. So what we don't understand, what we can't explain, that is what is God. And now that is a mathematical way of looking at God. But you know what, Sivantika, the great thing about this equation, G equal to infinity minus K, is the fact that to a certain extent, whenever you have an equation, a mathematical equation, which has infinity on one side of the equation, then the result is going to be indeterminate. Any mathematician will tell you that the result will be an indeterminate result. So even in the event that human knowledge, K, came close to infinity, so in other words, you had one set of the equation now becoming not G equal to infinity minus K, but G equal to infinity minus infinity.
Yes.
Even then that result would be indeterminate, which means, in other words, God is indeterminate, which in that sense means that you will never be able to explain God. So that eternal question that did God create man or did man create God, or the approach of two individuals, one sees the shivling and he says, this is a pathar, and one sees a pathar and he says, this is a shivling. I don't think that's a question which is not going to be answered. And you know what? It's great that it's never answered, because there are many, many, many things that we should, where we should have that mystery left in our world, where we can look up to something, where we can aspire to something. And that is that is that element which divinity and God brings into our lives. How does this entire epidemic impact our understanding of that element called God? I think there will probably be, and I hope there will be. Maybe this is my hope that is talking rather than what may actually play out. But my hope is that we are going to become much more caring towards Mother Nature, towards Earth, realizing that, hey, listen, we've really screwed around with our universe. We can't carry on living like this. We can't carry on consuming like this. We can't carry on polluting like this. We can't carry on eating like this. There is only that much that Mother Nature and Earth can take from us. So maybe it will bring about a little more introspection in us and make us more one with the universe. I have always maintained that, at the point where I think it was Gibran who said that, what is that point at which the raindrop falling into the ocean, what is that point at which the raindrop realizes that I'm no longer a raindrop, that I am not part of the ocean, but I have become the ocean. I think that is what is critical in humanity, where we understand that we have become one with that universal truth. And that realization, unfortunately, has been missing for a long, long time. I would hope that we come closer to it.
We certainly, actually, everybody, each one of us in our little way hopes that. And I think if we have that hope, I think we will have that action at some point as well.
Absolutely.
I'm going to now intersperse a few audience questions because they're also asking stuff that I wanted to ask you. One of them is actually about your association with James Patterson.
Yeah.
How was that like, and how did that change you?
By the way, on the chat screen, I can see one of my very dear friends, Neelima Dharadhar, on the chat screen. So I just want to say hi to Neelima. That I hope you are well, and it's so nice to see you on this chat. Okay, now coming back to your question.
We will take Neelima's question as well, but about your association with James Patterson.
Yeah.
What was that like, and how did you see your perspective or your narrative change with the association? Because he has famously said that every time he collaborates, it gives a different nuance to his story.
Sure.
So we wanted to know your perspective.
As you know, Sivantika, James is a bit of a factory. I mean, in the sense that if there was a book factory, it's probably James. Comes out with somewhere in the vicinity of about between 10 and 12 books every year.
Yes.
Vast majority are written with some form of collaboration. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the only books that James actually writes himself are probably the Alex Cross series. But besides that, all the other series are with some sort of a joint venture. He is very successful at it. Probably one of the only international authors who has had 19 successive New York Times #1 bestsellers. Probably one of the only authors who last year itself clocked in a little over $90 million in terms of revenues. So in that sense, he is just a giant in himself. The great thing is that because he does so many collaborations, he is very familiar with what works for a collaboration. And that structure is rather simple. Let me take 2 steps behind and explain to you how that particular collaboration came about. And then let me tell you as to how we worked at it. The collaboration started out primarily because of 2 women. And those 2 women were, one was a lady called Meru Gokhale, who in those days was working with Penguin Random House before the 2 entities merged, and was based out of London and was a dear friend of mine. And the other was a person called Susan Sandon, who represented James Patterson's interests within Random House, again based out of London. And as a matter of complete chance, both women worked out of the same office. So they were sitting down for lunch one day, and Susan said to Meru that Susan, Meru, James is interested in writing a thriller set in India. And Meru said, you know what? I think I just have a thriller writer in India in mind who would work beautifully for this. And in our country, Sevantika, we still have this wonderful notion of an arranged marriage, where a boy and girl, without seeing one another, the boy and girl can be hitched, and then they see each other much later in the discussions. So this was
was yours one?
Mine was an arranged marriage. I ended up meeting my wife all of about 6 times before I proposed to her. But obviously the formula works, because I've been married now almost 22 years. So and we have a 16-year-old son. Yes. But my marriage with James was also an arranged marriage, because Susan and Meru put it together. And then James and I ended up having a couple of video conferences like this one, where we talked about the idea for a story. And what James said was that he said, normally, Ashwin, when I work with co-authors, what I do is I write up an outline for a novel. And that would be relatively detailed, running into about 30 or 40 pages. And then based on my outline, you would write up the first draft of the novel. Mm-hmm. And then it would come back to me, and I would then write up the second draft, making substantive changes as I determined, as I deemed fit. He said, but this we have to slightly alter because I know very little about India. He said, if you ask me to write a story about a story set in Germany or England or the US, I'm comfortable doing that. But I'm not that comfortable when it comes down to India. So in this particular instance, the plot outline as well as the first draft would need to come from you. And that's what we really did, that I wrote up a plot outline, sent it on to James. Then James and I ended up having multiple back and forth discussions related to that plot outline. What could probably change? What could make it more exciting? Where would the thrill element be heightened more? And those are actually things, in the craft. People think that writing is an art. It's not an art. It's a craft. When you're writing genre fiction, it's much more a craft than it's an art. And so you realize that, hey, listen, a character that you revealed in chapter 15, you could actually heighten the tension by revealing it in chapter 20. I mean, those are little nuances that you pick up as you go along. So we eventually froze on a plot outline, and then I wrote up the first draft. But by the time that the first draft went into the second draft from James's side, there had been very, very substantial revisions. But I would say that what works in this sort of a collaborative environment, it's the difference between singing solo versus singing a jugalbandhi versus singing in a choir. I mean, when you're singing with other people, then you not only have to watch your own notes, but you have to watch their notes also. And I think that was the fun bit about working with James. He's undoubtedly a master of thriller craft. And what produces thrills and chills. So in that sense, you could say that I ended up getting a masterclass over 2 novels.
And what a masterclass. Such amazing novels and bestsellers. So I would love to keep asking you questions, actually. But we have some audience questions. So we're now going to switch over to the audience.
Okay, sure.
Yes, thank you. We have Mr. Ayodhya Prasad online, sure. And in case if wants to ask questions, please raise your hand. Mr. Ayodhya Prasad ji, I will just put your audio on. Can you hear us, Mr. Ayodhya Prasad ji?
Hello.
Haji.
Yes, sir.
Namaskar. Hi. How are you?
Very, very, very well, Ayodhya Prasad ji. Nice to meet you.
Same here, sir. आपसे एक तो लगाव तुरंत जोधपुर का नाम सुनते ही कि आपके पिताजी यहाँ से बिलोंग करते हैं.
हाँ जी.
So love to hear something from you, your memories related to Jodhpur, number one. And
Okay.
my second question is something related because we see how beautifully you connected Kal Chakra with the quantum physics.
हाँ जी.
So when you see coronavirus and related activities happening all around us,
हाँ
uh,
जी.
कुछ आपके दिमाग में कुछ यहाँ पे कुछ आता है, कुछ ऐसा कुछ आइडिया या कुछ ऐसी चीज के जो हमें अभी नजर नहीं आ रही है, इसके पीछे भी कुछ, ये भी कोई किसी
जरूर.
एक फोक का कुछ
जरूर.
ऐसा प्लान है?
जरूर. First of all, Ayodhya ji, thank you for that beautiful question. The first question, मेरे memories तो जोधपुर के बहुत हैं क्योंकि all the way up to 1985-86, which is when my grandmother passed away, up to that time, our family tradition was that everyone used to come to Jodhpur during Diwali because we were a joint family. And वो जो पूरा जिसे कहते हैं परिवार, पूरा कुटुंब साथ आ जाता था. I had a beautiful, there was a beautiful family home in Jodhpur in Pauta. It was called Ghansham Bhavan. And we as children used to spend hours playing out there. In those days, of course, Jodhpur was a very different town. आजकल तो सब कुछ सब जगह मिल जाता है. But in those days, you had very small areas of excitement. As children, we would, the ones who were on the verge of 16 or 17 used to be damn happy that they could pull out the Mahindra Jeep from the garage and we could go, gallivanting in Jodhpur city. So we would go to Mandor where we would buy mirchi badas. And of course, there used to be the coffee house where we used to get that pineapple ice cream. So those were the sort of things that we ended up doing in Jodhpur. Today, though, of course, Jodhpur has become nothing short of a metropolitan town. So everything is now right there. But I have some wonderful memories of growing up in simpler times. And of course, if you wanted a bit of a change, then you went for one of the movies. My family, the Sanghi family, my grandfather started out from Jodhpur in the 1930s, primarily as an automobile distributor. So in those days, he used to sell Rolls-Royce cars and cars built by British Motor Car Company and Austin, and to most of the Rajas and Maharajas of erstwhile Rajputana. As a result of which, most of us were pretty much known. कि हाँ ये वो सांगी वाले हैं तो ठीक है. अच्छा, कुछ सिनेमाज में हम लोगों के लिए बॉक्स ऑर्गेनाइज हो जाता था, तो we would occupy a box and we would watch whichever was the film running at that point of time. So as kids, we used to have a rollicking time in Jodhpur, and that's the reason why all the memories associated with Jodhpur are so beautiful. As regards your second question, which is in terms of Kal Chakra, well, the one thing that comes across from Kal Chakra is that the world really is in terms of, we see the world in terms of opposites. But those opposites, if you really dig a little deeper, those opposites don't really exist. So for example, we say that darkness is the opposite of light. But darkness is not the opposite of light. It is simply the absence of light. We say that the state of being cold is the opposite of heat. So heat and cold, but it isn't. Coldness is simply the absence of heat. And I have maintained all along that in our world, in fact, even I see that the source of energy, I see it as female energy or Shakti. So when there is nothing like masculine energy. Masculine energy is nothing else but the absence of female energy. Shiva, in that sense, is simply an absence of Shakti. In that sense, I believe that what we are now seeing is simply the absence of positivity in our world. And we've seen this in Kal Chakra, where I've talked about quantum entanglement, and I've talked about two particles sitting at massive distances and behaving in a similar way, but their spins continue to be opposite. So in that sense, they may be called quantum twins, but they are behaving in opposite ways. I personally see this is almost like a reboot button that Mother Nature has pressed on us. The way we reboot the hard drive of our machine. Right now, I don't see this as the end of the world. I see it as a reboot of the world. Probably it's going to force us to rethink the way that we are living. It's going to force us to rethink the way that we are consuming. It's going to force us to rethink in terms of what is important to us. In the last 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks that all these lockdowns have been going on, of course, I'm luckier than most because I'm able to sit here in my living room and in my study, and I'm able to write and I'm able to ideate about what I want to write next. But more importantly, it has forced me into an environment where I'm realizing that actually all the things that I pretty much need are the simpler things. I'm so happy that my wife is around, my son is around, my parents are around. I'm so happy that I have my books in my study. I'm so happy that there is dal chawal on the table to eat. I mean, so you realize what the simpler things are the things that you actually need. And I hope that the entire world will understand that we are going through that reboot at this moment. Maybe it's going to turn out into a better world. Who knows?
Hope so. Thank you so much, Ashwin.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have 8. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We have 8 more questions now.
Okay.
So, and I think everybody has to just come in. So I am quickly going to take the question of Madhulika Siddiqui. I don't see her hand.
Okay, I'm also
but I can read out the question. This says that what are the two characteristics of Krishna that resonates in today's scenario?
I've already answered that.
Okay. Okay, so we have this, and then there is the next question. Can you see what are you thinking about now? Anything beyond mythology?
So at this present moment, currently, in fact, what I'm presently working on during this lockdown is actually not a book, but I'm working on a web series, which is an out-and-out crime-related web series. So my intention has always been, if you notice, with most of my books in the Bharat series, I have typically taken 2 years to write each one of those books, because in 12 years, I've produced 6 books in the Bharat series. Now, my intention is that I'm actually going to crunch that time down to about 18 or 19 months by being a little more organized with the way I write and the way I research, which means that it gives me a window of about 5 or 6 months after every new book is released to be able to work on a few more projects which are outside the space of the Bharat series books. And so my thought is that ultimately, if I, as Ashwin Sanghi, consider myself to be a storyteller rather than simply a writer, then in that case, a storyteller should be open to being able to tell that story in multiple formats. And so currently what I'm working on is an outline for season 1 and season 2 of a web series. Once I'm done with that, then I plan to work on a short form storytelling, which unfortunately I'm contractually obligated not to be able to reveal at this stage. Once I'm done with both of these projects, then I will start working on the 7th book in the Bharat series. That will only happen by around July or August.
Thank you so much. To put Puneetji, that's going to be followed by Vidhi Shah, Iraji, Nilimaji, and Archanaji. I think we can just take these many questions in case there is time left, and if your questions are short, we'll be able to take more.
Actually, the problem that is going on, Apra, is not that their questions are long. The problem is that I tend to ramble on in my answers. So if you have a problem in terms of time, it's going to be because of Ashwin Sanghi, not because of the panelists.
So we have Puneet ji online. Puneet ji, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Good
Yeah,
afternoon,
please,
Mr. Sanghi. Pleasure talking to you.
Hi, Puneet ji. Nice to meet you.
I wanted to ask you, in the present time of intolerance, writing on mythology has the possibility of going totally wrong. So I wanted to ask you, when you write, do you really take care of this angle, or you let your pen flow freely about, whatever you want to write?
Okay, it's a very relevant question. Let me put it this way. I think whenever you're dealing with matters which are involving faith, forget about mythology or religion, wherever it's a matter of personal belief systems, personal faith, then I think you are treading in some ways on thin ice, and you have to be careful. At least as far as I individually am concerned, I have 2 or 3 rules that I follow when I write. The first rule is that whenever I take up a subject, I try and approach it with a sense of respect. It doesn't mean that I will follow the established narrative, because then it wouldn't be exciting. But it means that my effort is to respect what I'm writing about, rather than to simply stir up a controversy. That is very, very critical, because if your aim is to stir up a controversy, then in that case, it will come across very clearly in your narrative. So for example, if I was writing the Rosabal line, which talked about Jesus having possibly survived the crucifixion and having come to India and having lived there in Kashmir and eventually being buried in Rosabal, if my aim was simply to deride the view that no, he died on the cross and that he was resurrected, and that the moment you are taking a contrary position to that, then that constitutes what is called blasphemy. If blasphemy was the objective, then in that case, the narrative would have flowed very differently. Whereas if you read the Rosabal line, it's almost a childish excitement that, hey, it's very possible that our connection with Jesus is a lot older than we care to imagine. We think about Christianity having come later. What if Christ himself had come here? So it is from that childish excitement that the Rosabal narrative flows. So approach the subject with a sense of respect, number 1. Number 2, the moment you are writing on these sort of subjects, I think you owe it to your reader to do a ton of research before you actually end up writing about these subjects. I come across too many books these days where not enough time has been spent on researching the subject. Little bits and pieces have been picked out, they've been stitched together as a narrative, and they've been presented in a story form. I think that is being unfair to your reader. Third, if you notice with most of my books in the Bharat series, in fact, all the books in the Bharat series, there is a very, very extensive bibliography at the back, which talks about all the sources that I utilized while stitching together the narrative. More importantly, very often with the bibliography, you will find that there are sources which run contrary to the storyline of the book. So for example, in the Krishna Ki, I am presenting you a story of the possibility that the Taj Mahal could have been in some way linked to a structure called Tejo Mahalya. So I have presented you the source which provides that particular narrative, but I've also provided you with the contrary source, which says that no, that was bunkum. The idea being that the book should be a journey into that particular subject, and you should have an ability to be able to explore deeper into that subject, not only the view that has been presented in that thriller, but also the contrarian view to that view. So if you do all of that, then I think you're probably on less shaky ground. Finally, let me end with this one final word of caution. Most of the books and movies that land up into controversy, those are products where the creator of that product has found it rather expedient and convenient to create that particular controversy. Because frankly, controversy sells. So I find that the reason that very often I don't land up into controversy is because I have no desire to do that. I would rather sell my books the way I sell my books, and I'm quite happy that if the volume of the book turns out to be 1/4 of what someone else who uses that particular way of selling does it. That's fine. But I simply want you to enjoy the story. I don't want to create a controversy.
Wow, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So can we take 4 questions at the same time? Is it okay, Mr. Sanghi? And then we could answer because
as I'm
it's
saying,
5 more minutes left.
I'm saying, Apra, I'm happy to be here till whenever you need me. So I'm fine.
But actually, yeah, we have a session, following
That's
session
fine.
also.
So you could probably, you could cherry pick.
Okay, so we will take Ira ji and we will take Nilima ji.
Okay.
Here. So I'll take Ira ji first.
Okay.
Ira ji, can you hear us?
Her mic is switched off on my screen. That's why I can't. I think she's.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Hi, Ira.
Hi, Ashwin. First of all, wonderful to know I live right behind the old Sanghi house.
Oh, how beautiful. How lovely. So, the world of Zoom has created a world of connectivity which is way beyond 6 degrees of separation.
True. So my quick question that do you see yourself writing short stories in the near future?
One thing that you would have picked up about the way I'm answering everyone's questions is that I have no sense of time. And,
That's a Jodhpur trait.
Yeah, if I have to answer a question, then I must answer it completely. And I must build up the atmosphere and I must give you the context of my answer. Now, honestly, that's the reason I write the novels the way I do. This was an issue that used to come up even when I was writing along with James Patterson, that, an average novel from me will be a minimum of 110,000 words, going up to 150,000 words. James typically writes between 70 and 80,000 words. So he needs to convey that entire story in a much more fast-paced manner. Whereas I will not be able to convey that story without building up the atmosphere. So that is where my real issue with short stories is, that I don't see myself geared up to be able to tell those stories. In fact, honestly speaking, I really envy short story writers because I think that they have to be an extremely talented bunch to be able to convey that entire story within the space of a few pages. So I'm not qualified to do it. I don't see myself doing it, Ira.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we'll have Nilima ji.
Sure.
Nilima ji, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Hi,
Ashwin,
Nilima.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. And I'm thrilled to be here today in this Zoom session with you. You are an inveterate charmer, and clearly this is love in the times of Corona.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, so my question, which is also a bit of an observation, is...
But by the way, Nilima, I must tell you one thing, that I'm assuming that everyone out here has read your Kasturba book. But if they haven't, then that is one of my all-time favorite reads. So, I mean...
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Ashwin, you are my ambassador for life.
No, it's
Imagine, Ashwin Sanghi, my ambassador for life. Okay, here's my quick question to you. So, have you studied literature or quantum physics or history or mythology or criminal psychology, or are you simply just sheer genius?
No, I don't know that that's one of those questions which almost looks like as if it has been set up by a PR agency. So I'm reluctant to answer it. But Nilima, let me tell you this, that for me, I'm a master of none. I know a little bit about everything. So I know lots about very trivial stuff. Like, for example, I can answer the question that how much time does it take to drain a human body of blood? So I'll be able to answer that question because that's something that I've figured out for a crime thriller. But and similarly with history, there will be lots and lots of bits and pieces which I will be aware of, but there will be many, many gaps in my knowledge. But every book that I write is a journey in trying to cover those gaps. So I mean, like, I knew very little about Chinese history till the time that I actually ended up writing The Vault of Vishnu. And that's the time that I ended up doing a lot of research into Chinese history and the overlaps with Indian history. So with every book, hopefully I'm slightly closer to being a little more aware. But obviously, this is, the world of knowledge is in itself. We started out by talking about God equal to infinity minus K. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I clearly see that I will always be in the zone of ignorance.
Thank you, Ashwin. Delighted.
Thanks, Nilima.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry we will not be able to take two questions, one by Ira ji and one by Archana ji, because we are running short of time.
My apologies for having overrun the time. My sincerest apologies, Apra.
No, not
and
at
my
all.
apologies to the two people whose questions we could not answer.
We have absolutely had a blast, Ashwin. So please do not apologize. Like I said, it's going to be one more standing ovation in our houses from right here for you. Thank you so much. And I'm going to shamelessly steal G is equal to infinity minus K. Shamelessly steal that. And I'm sure a lot of other people will. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the audience. Thank you to the audience for joining us. Right Circle, like we said, is an initiative of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation in association with Ehsaas Women of Jodhpur, and Taj Harimel is our hospitality partner, and it is presented by Sri Cement. So thank you so much, Ashwin. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, Sevantika, and thank you both, Sevantika as well as Apra, and of course my dear friend Sandeep Bhatoria of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, who makes all of this happen magically. Thank you guys, and it's been a pleasure being here, and thank you all participants for being here with me today. Thank you.